lone rancher saved a Chinese girl from whipping. Next day, she offered her body to him. Jacob Thorne was a man carved from the very rock and dust of the frontier, and just as weathered. At 49, his tall frame remained sturdy, but his shoulders carried the invisible weight of profound loss. Years spent trying to wrestle a life from the stubborn earth on his failing ranch had etched deep lines into his face. His hair, once the color of dark soil, was now heavily salted with gray, and his blue eyes, usually fixed on the distant horizon, held the hollow ache of a man who had buried his entire world. His wife, Sarah, and their stillborn son had been taken by a fever 5 winters past, and with them, they had taken the light from Jacob's life. His spread, a solitary patch of land nestled in a valley that seemed to collect more wind than rain, was drowning in debt and drought. The banking house in the nearby mining town of Gritstone was a patient predator, circling ever closer, ready to claim the land if Jacob missed another payment. His only companions were a weary-eyed Mustang named Flint and a scruffy hound called Patches, whose own tired gait seemed to mimic Jacob's after a long day of mending fences that enclosed nothing but parched grass. Jacob despised Gritstone. It was a chaotic pit of gold-hungry miners, sharp-eyed gamblers, and aimless men whose troubles were easily ignited by cheap whiskey. But necessity was a harsh master, and it was necessity that drove him down the winding dirt road for flour, salt, and bullets. On a blistering afternoon in late summer, with the sun beating down like a blacksmith's hammer, Jacob tied Flint to the hitching post outside the general store. Just as he reached for the door, a commotion from the center of town snared his attention. A crowd had formed a tight, jeering circle around the town's splintered whipping post. In the center of it all stood Quentin Blackwood, the tyrannical owner of the largest mining operation in the territory. Blackwood was a man whose wealth was matched only by his cruelty, his face perpetually set in a sneer of cold authority. In his hand, he held a thick leather bullwhip, coiled like a serpent ready to strike. At his feet, her hands bound tightly to the post, knelt a young Chinese girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her traditional dark trousers and tunic were tattered and caked with dust, and her long, black braid had come partially undone, stray hairs clinging to her tear-streaked face. Her eyes, wide with a terror that seemed too large for her small frame, were nevertheless filled with a defiant fire. "This thief was caught stealing rice from my company stores." Blackwood's voice boomed, slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "These people come to our land and think they can take what is ours. It's time she learned a lesson on behalf of her kind." A few men in the crowd cheered drunkenly, while others shuffled their feet, their discomfort overshadowed by their fear of Blackwood. Jacob stood frozen, his hand gripping the wooden handle of the store's door. His gaze locked with the girl's. In the depths of her dark, terrified eyes, he saw a plea not for mercy, but for a shred of dignity in the face of utter humiliation. He saw the same desperate, cornered look he'd seen in his Sarah's eyes as the fever had taken its final, brutal hold. It was a look of someone whose world was ending, with no one to stand for them. The past 5 years of solitary grief and bitter resignation fell away from him. Without a conscious thought, Jacob strode forward, his heavy boots kicking up clouds of dust. His voice, rough from disuse, cut through the tense air with the sharp crack of a rifle shot. "That's enough, Blackwood." The crowd quieted, turning to face this grim, solitary rancher. Blackwood lowered the whip a few inches, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this, Thorne. This is my business." Jacob didn't stop until he was standing directly between the furious mine owner and the trembling girl. His weathered frame, though not as broad as Blackwood's, seemed as unmovable as a mountain. "She's just a girl. You lay that whip on her, your business becomes mine." Blackwood sneered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "And what will you do, old man? Your ranch is failing, and your spirit is broken. You have nothing." "A man with nothing left to lose is a man you don't want to cross," Jacob said, his voice dangerously low. His hand fell to rest on the worn leather holster at his hip, where his old Colt revolver Saturday. It wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of fact. The air grew thick and heavy. Blackwood, for all his bluster, was no fool. He saw the cold, unwavering certainty in Jacob's eyes, the look of a man who had already faced the worst life had to offer and had no fear left. Spitting a curse onto the dusty ground, Blackwood lowered the whip. "Fine," he growled, throwing the girl's binding rope at Jacob's feet. "Take the little thief. She's your problem now." Jacob knelt, his calloused fingers working patiently at the tight knots until the girl's wrists were free. They were raw and bleeding. She staggered to her feet, small but standing proud, refusing to show any weakness to the staring crowd. "My name is Mai," she whispered in heavily accented English, her voice trembling but clear. "I did not steal. My father, he worked in Mr. Blackwood's mine. He is gone now. The company store took all his wages for debt. There was no food." Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd heard the stories of how the Chinese laborers were treated, paid in scrip, charged exorbitant prices at the company store, and trapped in a cycle of endless debt. He simply nodded, not wanting to shame her further. "Come on, girl. Let's get you away from this place." He led her to Flint, and with a gentleness that surprised even himself, he lifted her onto the saddle. The crowd parted for them, their whispers and stares following them like a swarm of flies as they rode out of town. The journey back to the ranch was made in near silence. When they arrived at the desolate cabin, Jacob offered her a dipper of cool water from the well and a thick slice of bread, which she ate as if she hadn't seen food in days. He prepared a bed of fresh hay and a clean blanket for her in the corner of the barn. "You can rest here for the night," he said, his tone gruff to hide the unfamiliar stir of compassion. "In the morning, we'll figure out where your people are." Mai shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I have no people here. My father was all I had. We came from across the great ocean for a better life." Jacob's heart, which he had long thought to be a useless, hardened stone in his chest, felt a painful twinge. The crushing weight of her loneliness was a feeling he knew all too well. "All right then," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You can stay here until you're healed and ready to move on. No one's going to run you off." He left her in the barn and returned to his cold, empty cabin. For the first time in years, the silence felt different. It was no longer just empty, it was waiting. At the first hint of dawn, a soft, hesitant knock came at his cabin door. Jacob opened it to find Mai standing on the porch, her face scrubbed clean and her hair neatly braided. She held out her hands, not in a plea, but in an offering. "Sir," she began, her gaze fixed on the floorboards as a deep blush crept up her neck. "Yesterday, you saved my honor. You saved my life. I have nothing to give. No money, no property. This is all I have to offer to repay my debt to you." Her meaning was unmistakable, an act of ultimate desperation from a girl who believed her body was the only currency she possessed. Jacob was stunned into silence. He saw not a seductress, but a frightened child trying to survive using the only terrible logic her desperate world had taught her. A wave of profound sadness and protective anger washed over him. He gently took her by the shoulders, making her look at him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and shame. "Mai," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You listen to me. You don't owe me a thing. I didn't do what I did yesterday to claim a payment. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. Here, in this house, you don't repay kindness with that. You repay it with respect. We're square. Do you understand?" Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks, not of fear this time, but of overwhelming relief. She nodded, unable to speak. "Good," he said, releasing her shoulders. "Now, you're welcome to stay. You can help around the ranch to earn your keep until you decide what's next. There's mending to be done, a garden to be tended. You work, you eat, you have a safe roof over your head. That's the deal." That morning marked a turning point. The quiet, grieving ranch slowly began to stir with a new kind of life. Mai was a tireless worker, her small hands surprisingly deft. She mended Jacob's torn shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She showed him how to use wild herbs she found growing by the creek to make a tea that soothed the ache in his old bones. In the small garden patch behind the cabin, she planted strange new vegetables from a precious handful of seeds she'd kept hidden in a small silk pouch, and soon, green shoots pushed through the tired soil. Jacob, in turn, taught her how to handle flint, how to properly swing a hammer to mend a fence post, and how to read the clouds for signs of rain. Their conversations were often halting, a mixture of his simple words and her careful English, but they built a bridge of understanding. For the first time since Sarah's passing, the cabin was filled with the aroma of cooking that wasn't just Jacob's bland beans and bacon. The sound of Mai's soft humming of folk songs from her homeland became a gentle melody against the constant whisper of the prairie wind. The ranch, once a monument to his grief, was slowly becoming a home again. But Quentin Blackwood was a man who nursed a grudge like a treasured wound. Humiliated in his own town, he spread venomous rumors that Jacob Thorne was consorting with a foreign thief, poisoning the already prejudiced minds of the townsfolk against him. The trouble arrived one moonless night. The frantic barking of Patches shattered the peace, followed by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Jacob grabbed his rifle from its rack above the fireplace, his heart pounding with a cold, familiar dread. He stepped onto the porch just as a half-dozen riders, their faces illuminated by the sinister flicker of torches, surrounded the cabin. Blackwood sat on his dark stallion at their lead. "Thorne! Hand over the savage!" Blackwood's voice dripped with menace. "She doesn't belong here, and neither do you if you're sheltering her." The cabin door opened, and Mai appeared behind Jacob, a long, sharp kitchen knife clutched in her hand, her eyes blazing with a courage he had never seen before. "I am no thief," she cried out. "You are the one who steals. You stole my father's life with your mine." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Brave words for a little girl, he signaled his men, and a shot rang out, a bullet splintering the porch rail inches from Jacob's head. Instinct took over. Jacob fired back, his shot catching one of the riders in the shoulder and sending him reeling. As the men charged, Mai darted back inside. She emerged not with a weapon, but with a bucket of rendered lard she'd been preparing for soap making. With a desperate cry, she flung the slick, greasy substance across the wooden porch steps. The first two riders to dismount hit the steps at a run, their boots sliding out from under them. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses. The momentary chaos gave Jacob the opening he needed. He tackled Blackwood as the larger man charged forward, sending them both tumbling into the dirt. They traded blows, a desperate, grunting brawl of fists and fury. One of the other riders recovered and aimed his pistol at Jacob. But Patches, the scruffy, loyal hound, launched himself with a ferocious snarl, sinking his teeth into the man's leg and making him shriek in pain and flee. Seizing her chance, Mai grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the porch and brought it down with all her might on the arm of the man fighting Jacob. A sickening crack echoed in the night as Blackwood's arm broke. He howled in agony. Outnumbered, outsmarted, and with their leader incapacitated, the remaining riders lost their nerve. They dragged the moaning Blackwood onto his horse and retreated into the darkness, their threats and curses swallowed by the vast, indifferent prairie. In the sudden, ringing silence, Jacob and Mai stood side by side on the porch, bruised, bloodied, but unbowed. The torch one of the men had dropped flickered in the dirt, casting long, dancing shadows. "You didn't have to do that," Jacob said, breathing heavily as he wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. "You fought for me," Mai replied softly, her voice shaking slightly. "And you said we repay kindness with respect. I think this is also respect. To protect our home." The fight in the valley changed everything. Word of how the reclusive rancher and the young Chinese girl had fought off Blackwood and his thugs spread through Gritstone. It turned out many of the townsfolk and miners, long oppressed by Blackwood's tyranny, had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to him. The sheriff, a decent man who had previously been too intimidated to act, launched a formal investigation into Blackwood's operations, uncovering years of wage theft and brutal practices. The bank, hearing the story and seeing a new fire in Jacob Thorne, quietly extended the terms of his loan. The ranch had been given a second chance. Mai chose to stay. She was no longer a guest or a hired hand, she was family. Together, they rebuilt the ranch, not just the fences and the barn, but its very soul. They dug an irrigation ditch from the creek to the garden, which flourished under Mai's care. With the loan extension, they bought a small herd of hardy cattle. The valley, once silent and mournful, was now filled with the lowing of livestock and Mai's cheerful songs. By 1885, the man known as Jacob Thorne was gone, replaced by someone with a light in his eyes and a gentle smile that appeared more often than not. Mai, now a poised and strong young woman, rode beside him, as skilled with a lasso as he was with a rifle. They had faced blizzards, droughts, and wolves together, forging a bond of loyalty and love that ran deeper than blood. On clear, quiet evenings, Jacob would sit on the porch, with Patches resting at his feet, now old and grey. He would listen as Mai told him stories of her homeland, tales of dragons and emperors and a world of green mountains so different from their rugged prairie. The ranch, once a symbol of all he had lost, was now a thriving testament to a new beginning, a home, a sanctuary, built on a single, defiant act of compassion in a dusty town square. So, friends, as the fire dims and your eyelids grow heavy, let the tale of Jacob and Mai linger. For it shows that even in the heart of the Old West, where life was hard and loneliness was a constant companion, the most unlikely seeds of family could take root and blossom, proving that a person's courage is the only true currency, and a home is simply a place where you are willing to fight for the person standing beside you.